The Golden Bird. A long time ago there was a king who had a lovely pleasure garden round his palace, and in it stood a tree which bore golden apples. When the apples were nearly ripe they were counted. The very next morning one was missing. This was reported to the king, and he ordered a watch to be set every night under the tree. The king had 3 sons, and he sent the eldest into the garden at nightfall, but by midnight he was overcome with sleep, and in the morning another apple was missing. On the following night the second son had to keep watch, but he fared no better. When the clock struck 12, he too was fast asleep, and in the morning another apple was gone. It was now the third son's turn to watch. He was quite ready, but the king had not much confidence in him, and thought he would accomplish even less than his brothers. At last, however, he gave his permission, so the youth laid down under the tree to watch, determined not to let sleep get the mastery over him. As the clock struck 12, there was a rustling in the air, and by the light of the moon he saw a bird, whose shining feathers were of pure gold. The bird settled on the tree, and was just plucking an apple when the young prince shot an arrow at it. The bird flew away, but the arrow hit its plumage, and one of the golden feathers fell to the ground. The prince picked it up, and in the morning took it to the king, and told him all that he had seen in the night. The king assembled his council, and everybody declared that a feather like that was worth more than a whole kingdom. "If the feather is worth so much," said the king, "one will not satisfy me. I must and will have the whole bird." The eldest, relying on his cleverness, set out in search of the bird, and thought that he would be sure to find it soon. When he had gone some distance he saw a fox sitting by the edge of a wood. He raised his gun and aimed at it. The fox cried out, "Do not shoot me, and I will give you some good advice. You are going to look for the golden bird. You will come to a village at nightfall, where you will find 2 inns opposite each other. One of them will be brightly lit, and there will be noise and revelry going on in it. Be sure you do not choose that one, but go into the other, even if you don't like the look of it so well." "How can a stupid animal like that give me good advice?" thought the king's son, and he pulled the trigger, but missed the fox, who turned tail and made off into the wood. Thereupon the prince continued his journey, and at nightfall reached the village with the 2 inns. Singing and dancing were going on in the one, and the other had a poverty-stricken and decayed appearance. "I should be a fool," he said, "if I were to go to that miserable place with this good one so near." So he went into the noisy one, and lived there in rioting and revelry, forgetting the bird, his father, and all his good counsels. When some time had passed, and the eldest son did not come back, the second prepared to start in quest of the golden bird. He met the fox as the eldest son had done, and it gave him the same good advice, of which he took just as little heed. He came to the 2 inns and saw his brother standing at the window of the one whence sounds of revelry proceeded. He could not withstand his brother's calling, so he went in and gave himself up to the life of pleasure. Again some time passed, and the king's youngest son wanted to go out to try his luck, but his father would not let him go. "It is useless," he said. "He will be even less able to find the golden bird than his brothers, and when any ill luck overtakes him, he will not be able to help himself. He has no backbone." But at last, because he gave him no peace, he let him go. The fox again sat at the edge of the wood, begged for its life, and gave its good advice. The prince was good-natured, and said, "Be calm, little fox, I will do thee no harm." "You won't repent it," answered the fox, "and so that you may get along faster, come and mount on my tail." No sooner had he seated himself than the fox began to run, and away they flew over stick and stone, at such a pace that his hair whistled in the wind. When they reached the village, the prince dismounted, and following the good advice of the fox, he went straight to the mean inn without looking about him. and there he passed a peaceful night. In the morning, when he went out to the fields, there sat the fox, who said, "I will now tell you what you must do next. Walk straight on till you come to a castle, in front of which a whole regiment of soldiers is encamped. Don't be afraid of them. They will all be asleep and snoring. Walk through the midst of them straight into the castle and through all the rooms, and at last you will reach an apartment where the golden bird will be hanging in a common wooden cage. A golden cage stands near it for show, but beware, whatever you do, you must not take the bird out of the wooden cage to put it into the other, or it will be the worse for you." After these words, the fox again stretched out its tail. The prince took his seat on it, and away they flew over stick and stone, till his hair whistled in the wind. When he arrived at the castle, he found everything just as the fox had said. The prince went to the room where the golden bird hung in the wooden cage, with a golden cage standing by, and the 3 golden apples were scattered about the room. He thought it would be absurd to leave the beautiful bird in the common old cage, so he opened the door, caught it, and put it into the golden cage. But as he did it, the bird uttered a piercing shriek. The soldiers woke up, rushed in, and carried him away to prison. Next morning, he was taken before a judge, and, as he confessed all, he was sentenced to death. The king, however, said that he would spare his life on one condition, and this was that he should bring him the golden horse which runs faster than the wind. In addition, he should have the golden bird as a reward. So the prince set off with many sighs. He was very sad, for where was he to find the golden horse? Then suddenly he saw his old friend the fox sitting on the road. "Now you see," said the fox, "all this has happened because you did not listen to me. All the same, keep up your spirits. I will protect you and tell you how to find the golden horse. You must keep straight along the road, and you will come to a palace, in the stable of which stands the golden horse. The grooms will be lying round the table, but they will be fast asleep and snoring, and you can safely lead the horse through them. Only, one thing you must be aware of. Put the old saddle of wooden leather upon it, and not the golden one hanging near, or you will rue it." Then the fox stretched out his tail. The prince took his seat, and away they flew over stick and stone, till his hair whistled in the wind. Everything happened just as the fox had said. The prince came to the stable where the golden horse stood, but when he was about to put the old saddle on its back, he thought, "Such a beautiful animal will be disgraced if I don't put the good saddle upon him, as he deserves." Hardly had the golden saddle touched the horse than he began neighing loudly. The grooms awoke, seized the prince, and threw him into a dungeon. The next morning he was taken before a judge and condemned to death, but the king promised to spare his life and gave him the golden horse as well, if he could bring him the beautiful princess out of the golden palace. With a heavy heart the prince set out, when to his delight he soon met the faithful fox. "I ought to leave you to your fate," he said, "but I will have pity on you and once more help you out of your trouble. Your road leads straight to the golden palace. You will reach it in the evening, and at night, when everything is quiet, the beautiful princess will go to the bathroom to take a bath. As she goes along, spring forward and give her a kiss, and she will follow you. Lead her away with you. Only on no account allow her to bid her parents goodbye, or it will go badly with you." Again the fox stretched out his tail. The prince seated himself upon it, and off they flew over stick and stone, till his hair whistled in the wind. When he got to the palace, it was just as the fox had said. He waited till midnight, and when the whole palace was wrapped in sleep, and the maiden went to take a bath, he sprang forward and gave her a kiss. She said she was quite willing to go with him, but she implored him to let her say goodbye to her parents. At first he refused, but as she cried and fell at his feet, at last he gave her leave. Hardly had the maiden stepped up to her father's bed when he and everyone else in the palace woke up. The prince was seized and thrown into prison. Next morning the king said to him, "Your life is forfeited, and it can only be spared if you clear away the mountain in front of my window, which shuts out the view. It must be done in 8 days, and if you accomplish the task, you shall have my daughter as a reward." So the prince began his labors, and he dug and shoveled without ceasing. On the 7th day, when he saw how little he had done, he became very sad, and gave up all hope. However, in the evening the fox appeared and said, "You do not deserve any help from me, but lie down and go to sleep. I will do the work." In the morning, when he awoke and looked out of the window, the mountain had disappeared. Overjoyed, the prince hurried to the king and told him that his condition was fulfilled, and, whether he liked it or not, he must keep his word and give him his daughter. So they both went away together, and before long the faithful fox joined them. "You certainly have got the best thing of all," said he, "but to the maiden of the golden palace the golden horse belongs." "How am I to get it?" asked the prince. "Oh, I will tell you that," answered the fox. "First, take the beautiful maiden to the king who sent you to the golden palace. There will be great joy when you appear, and they will bring out the golden horse to you. Mount it at once, and shake hands with everybody, last of all with the beautiful maiden. And when you have taken her hand firmly, pull her up beside you with a swing and gallop away. No one will be able to catch you, for the horse goes faster than the wind." All of this was successfully done, and the prince carried off the beautiful maiden on the golden horse. The fox was not far off, and he said to the prince, "Now I will help to get you the golden bird too. When you approach the castle where the golden bird lives, let the maiden dismount, and I will take care of her. Then, ride with the golden horse into the courtyard of the castle. There will be a great rejoicing when they see you, and they will bring out the golden bird to you. As soon as you have the cage in your hand, gallop back to us and take up the maiden again." When these plans had succeeded, and the prince was ready to ride on with all his treasures, the fox said to him, "Now you must reward me for my help." "What do you want?" asked the prince. "When you reach that wood, shoot me dead and cut off my head and paws." "That would indeed be gratitude," said the prince. "I can't possibly promise to do such a thing." The fox said, "If you won't do it, I must leave you. But before I go, I will give you one more piece of advice. Beware of 2 things. Buy no gallows birds, and don't sit on the edge of a well." Saying which, he ran off into the wood. The prince thought, "That is a strange animal. What whims he has! Who on earth would want to buy gallows birds? And the desire to sit on the edge of a well has never yet seized me." He rode on with the beautiful maiden, and the road led him through the village where his 2 brothers had stayed behind. There was a great hubbub in the village, and when he asked what it was about, he was told that 2 persons were going to be hanged. When he got near, he saw that they were his brothers, who had wasted their possessions and done all sorts of evil deeds. He asked if they could not be set free. "Yes, if you ransom them," answered the people. "But why will you throw your money away in buying off such wicked people?" He did not stop to reflect, however, but paid the ransom for them, and when they were set free they all journeyed on together. They came to the wood where they had first met the fox. It was deliciously cool, while the sun was broiling outside. So the 2 brothers said, "Let us sit down here by the well to rest a little and eat and drink." The prince agreed, and during the conversation he forgot what he was about, and, never dreaming of any foul play, seated himself on the edge of the well. But his 2 brothers threw him backwards into it, and went home to their father, taking with them the maiden, the horse, and the bird. "Here we bring you not only the golden bird, but the golden horse, and the maiden from the golden palace as our booty." Thereupon there was great rejoicing, but the horse would not eat, the bird would not sing, and the maiden sat and wept all day. The youngest brother had not perished, however. Happily the well was dry, and he fell upon soft moss without taking any harm, only he could not get out. Even in this great strait the faithful fox did not forsake him, but came leaping down and scolded him for not taking his advice. "I can't leave you to your fate, though. I must help you to get back to the light of the day." He told him to take tight hold of his tail, and then he dragged him up. "You are not out of every danger even now," said the fox. "Your brothers were not sure of your death, so they have set watchers all over the wood to kill you if they see you." A poor old man was sitting by the roadside, and the prince exchanged clothes with him, and by this means he succeeded in reaching the king's court. Nobody recognized him, but the bird began to sing, the horse began to eat, and the beautiful maiden left off crying. In astonishment the king asked, "What does all this mean?" The maiden answered, "I do not know, but I was very sad, and now I am gay. It seems to me that my true bridegroom must have come." She told the king all that had happened, although the two brothers had threatened her with death if she betrayed anything. The king ordered every person in the palace to be brought before him. Among them came the prince disguised as an old man in all his rags, but the maiden knew him at once and fell on his neck. The wicked brothers were seized and put to death, but the prince was married to the beautiful maiden and proclaimed heir to the king. But what became of the poor fox? Long afterwards, when the prince went out into the fields one day, he met the fox, who said, "You have everything you can desire, but there is no end to my misery. It still lies within your power to release me." And again he implored the prince to shoot him dead, and to cut off his head and paws. At last the prince consented to do as he was asked, and no sooner was it done than the fox was changed into a man, none other than the brother of the beautiful princess, at last set free from the evil spell which so long had laid upon him. There was nothing now wanting to their happiness for the rest of their lives. Hans in Luck. Hans had served his master for 7 years, when he one day said to him, "Master, my time is up. I want to go home to my mother. Please give me my wages." His master answered, "You have served me well and faithfully, and as the service has been, so shall the wages be." And he gave him a lump of gold as big as his head. Hans took out his pocket handkerchief and tied up the gold in it, and then slung the bundle over his shoulder and started on his homeward journey. As he walked along, just dragging one foot after the other, a man on horseback appeared, riding fresh and gay, along on his spirited horse. "Ah," said Hans, quite loud as he passed, "what a fine thing riding must be. You are as comfortable as if you were in an easy chair. You don't stumble over any stones, you save your shoes, and you get where you're going without noticing how." The horseman, who heard him, stopped and said, "Hello, Hans. Why are you on foot?" "I can't help it," said Hans, "as I have this bundle to carry home. It's true that it's a lump of gold, but I can hardly hold my head up for it, and it weighs down my shoulder frightfully." "I'll tell you what," said the horseman. "We'll change. I'll give you my horse, and you shall give me your bundle." "With all my heart," said Hans, "but you will be rarely burdened with it." The horseman dismounted, took the gold and helped Hans up, put the bridle into his hands and said, "When you want to go very fast, you must click your tongue and cry, 'Gee-up! Gee-up!'" Hans was delighted when he found himself so easily riding along on horseback. After a time it occurred to him that he might be going faster, and he began to click with his tongue and to cry, "Gee-up! Gee-up!" The horse broke into a gallop, and before Hans knew where he was thrown off into a ditch which separated the fields from the high road. The horse would have run away if a peasant coming along the road leading a cow hadn't caught it. Hans felt himself all over, and picked himself up, but he was very angry, and said to the peasant, "Riding is poor fun at times, when you have a nag like mine, which stumbles and throws you, and puts you in danger of breaking your neck. I'll never mount it again. I admire that cow of yours much more. You can walk comfortably behind her, and you have her milk into the bargain every day, as well as butter and cheese. What would I not give for a cow like that?" "Well," said the peasant, "if you have such a fancy for it as all that, I will exchange the cow for the horse." Hans accepted the offer with delight, and the peasant mounted the horse and rode rapidly off. Hans drove his cow peacefully on, and thought what a lucky bargain he had made. "If only I have a bit of bread, and I don't expect ever to be without that, I shall always have butter and cheese to eat with it. If I'm thirsty, I only have to milk my cow, and I have milk to drink. What more could my heart desire?" When he came to an inn, he made a halt, and with great joy ate up all the food he had with him, all his dinner, and his supper too, and gave the last coins he had for half a glass of beer. Then he went on further in the direction of his mother's village, driving his cow before him. The heat was overpowering, and as midday drew near, Hans found himself on a heath which it took him an hour to cross. He was so hot and thirsty that his tongue was parched and clung to the roof of his mouth. "This can easily be set to rights," thought Hans. "I will milk my cow and quench my thirst with the milk." He tied her to a tree, and as he had no pail, he used his leather cap instead. But, try as hard as he would, not a single drop of milk appeared. As he was very clumsy in his attempts, the impatient animal gave him a severe kick on his forehead with one of her hind legs. He was stunned by the blow and fell to the ground, where he lay for some time, not knowing where he was. Happily, just then a butcher came along the road, trundling a young pig in a wheelbarrow. "What is going on here?" he cried, as he helped poor Hans up. Hans told him all that had happened. The butcher handed him his flask and said, "Here, take a drink, it will do you good. The cow can't give any milk, I suppose. She must be too old. Good for nothing except to be a beast of burden, or go to the butcher." "Oh dear," said Hans, smoothing his hair. "Now whoever would have thought it? Killing the animal is all very well, but what kind of meat will it be? For my part, I don't like cow's flesh. It's not juicy enough. Now, if one had a nice young pig like that, it would taste ever so much better. And then, all those sausages." "Listen, Hans," then said the butcher. "For your sake, I will make an exchange, and let you have the pig instead of the cow." "God reward your friendship," said Hans, handing over the cow as the butcher untied the pig and put its halter into his hand. Hans went on his way, thinking how well everything was turning out for him. Even if a mishap befell him, something else immediately happened to make up for it. Soon after this, he met a lad carrying a beautiful white goose under his arm. They passed the time of day, and Hans began to tell him how lucky he was, and what successful bargains he had made. The lad told him that he was taking the goose for a christening feast. "Just feel it," he went on, holding it up by the wings. "Feel how heavy it is. It's true, they have been stuffing it for 8 weeks. Whoever eats that roast goose will have to wipe the fat off both sides of his mouth." "Yes, indeed," answered Hans, weighing it in his hand. "But my pig is no lightweight either." Then the lad looked cautiously about from side to side and shook his head. "Now look here," he began. "I think there's something suspicious about your pig. One has just been stolen out of the Schultz's sty, in the village I've come from. I fear it is the one you're leading. They sent people out to look for it, and it would be a bad business for you if you were found with it. The least they would do would be to put you in the black hole." Poor Hans was very much frightened at this. Oh dear, he said. Do help me out of this trouble. You are more at home here. Take my pig, and let me have your goose. Well, I shall run some risk if I do, but I won't be the means of getting you into a scrape. So he took the rope in his hand and quickly drove the pig up a side road, while honest Hans, relieved of his trouble, plodded on with the goose under his arm. When I really come to think it over, he said to himself, I still had the best of the bargain. First, there is the delicious roast goose, and then all the fat that will drip out of it in roasting, keeping us in goose fat to eat on our bread for 3 months at least. And last of all, there are the beautiful white feathers, which I'll stuff my pillow with. Then I shall need no rocking to send me to sleep. How delighted my mother will be. As he passed through the last village, he came to a knife grinder with his cart, singing to his wheel as it buzzed merrily around. Scissors and knives I grind so fast, and hang up my cloak against the blast. Hans stopped to look at him, and at last he spoke to him and said, You must be doing a good trade to be so merry over your grinding. I didn't buy it. I exchanged my pig for it. And the pig? Oh, I got that instead of my cow. And the cow? I got that for a horse. And the horse? I gave a lump of gold as big as my head for it. And the gold? Oh, that was my wages for 7 years' service. You certainly have known how to manage your affairs, said the grinder. Now, if you could manage to hear the money jingling in your pockets when you got up in the morning, you would indeed have made your fortune. How shall I set about that? Asked Hans. You must be a grinder like me. Nothing is needed for it but a whetstone. Everything else will come of itself. I have one here which certainly is a little damaged, but you need not give me anything for it but your goose. Are you willing? How can you ask me such a question? Said Hans. Why, I shall be the happiest person in the world. If I can have some money every time I put my hand in my pocket, what more should I have to worry about? So he handed him the goose and took the whetstone in exchange. Now, said the grinder, lifting up an ordinary large stone which lay near on the road, here is another good stone into the bargain. You can hammer out all your old nails on it to straighten them. Take it and carry it off. Hans shouldered the stone and went on his way with a light heart, and his eyes shining with joy. I must have been born in a lucky hour, he cried. Everything happens just as I want it, just as it ought to happen to a Sunday's child. In the meantime, as he had been on foot since daybreak, he began to feel very tired, and he was also very hungry, as he had eaten all his provisions at once in the joy at his bargain over the cow. At last, he could hardly walk any further, and he was obliged to stop every minute to rest. Then the stones were frightfully heavy, and he could not get rid of the thought that it would be very nice if he were not obliged to carry them any further. He dragged himself like a snail to a well in the fields, meaning to rest and refresh himself with a draught of the cool water. So as not to injure the stones by sitting on them, he laid them carefully on the edge of the well. Then he sat down, and was about to stoop down to drink when he inadvertently gave them a little push. Both the stones fell straight into the water. When Hans saw them disappear before his very eyes, he jumped for joy, and then knelt down and thanked God with tears in his eyes for having shown him this further grace, and relieved him of the heavy stones, which were all that remained to trouble him, without giving him anything to reproach himself with. There is certainly no one under the sun as happy as I. And so, with a light heart, free from every care, he bounded on home to his mother. Jorinda and Joringel. There once was an old castle in the middle of a vast thick wood. In it there lived an old woman quite alone, and she was a witch. By day she made herself into a cat, or a screech owl, but regularly at night she became a human being again. In this way she was able to decoy wild beasts and birds, which she would kill and boil or roast. If any man came within 100 paces of the castle, he was forced to stand still and could not move from the place till she gave the word of release. But if an innocent maiden came within the circle, she changed her into a bird and shut her up in a cage which she carried into a room in the castle. She must have had 7,000 cages of this kind, containing pretty birds. Now there was once a beautiful maiden called Jorinda, who was more beautiful than all the other maidens. She had promised to marry a very handsome youth named Joringel, and it was in the first days of their courtship, when they took the greatest joy in being alone together, that one day they wandered out into the forest. "Take care," said Joringel. "Don't let us get too near the castle." It was a lovely evening. The sunshine glanced between the tree trunks of the dark greenwood, while the turtle doves sang plaintively in the old beech trees. Yet Jorinda sat down in the sunshine, and could not help weeping and bewailing, while Joringel, too, soon became just as mournful. They both felt as miserable as if they had been going to die. Gazing round them, they found they had lost their way, and did not know how they should find the path home. Half the sun still appeared above the mountain, half had sunk below. Joringel peered out into the bushes and saw the old walls of the castle quite close to them. He was so terror-struck, and became pale as death. Jorinda was singing. "My birdie with its ring so red, sings sorrow, sorrow, sorrow. My love will mourn when I am dead. Tomorrow, yug, yug." Joringel looked at her, but she was changed into a nightingale who sang, "Yug, yug." A screech owl with glowing eyes flew 3 times round her, and cried 3 times, "Shoo, hoo, hoo." Joringel could not stir. He stood like a stone without being able to speak, or cry, or move hand or foot. The sun had now set. The owl flew into a bush, out of which appeared almost at the same moment a crooked old woman, skinny and yellow. She had big red eyes and a crooked nose whose tip reached her chin. She mumbled something, caught the nightingale and carried away in her hand. Joringel could not say a word nor move from the spot, and the nightingale was gone. At last the old woman came back and said in a droning voice, "Greeting to thee, Zachiel. When the moon shines upon the cage, unloose the captive, Zachiel." Then Joringel was free. He fell on his knees before the witch and implored her to give back his Jorinda, but she said he would never have her again and went away. He pleaded, he wept, he lamented, but all in vain. "Alas, what is to become of me?" said Joringel. At last he went away, and arrived at a strange village, where he spent a long time as a shepherd. He often wandered round about the castle, but did not go too near it. At last he dreamt one night that he found a blood-red flower, in the midst of which was a beautiful large pearl. He plucked the flower, and took it to the castle. Whatever he touched with it was made free of enchantment. He dreamt, too, that by this means he had found his Jorinda again. In the morning when he awoke he began to search, over hill and dale, in the hope of finding a flower like this. He searched till the 9th day, when he found the flower early in the morning. In the middle was a big dewdrop, as big as the finest pearl. This flower he carried day and night till he reached the castle. When he came within the 100 paces of a castle, he was not held fast as before, but walked straight up to the door. Joringel was filled with joy. He touched the door with the flower, and it flew open. He went in through the court and listened for the sound of birds. He went on and found the hall, where the witch was feeding the birds in the 7,000 cages. When she saw Joringel, she was angry, very angry, scolded, and spat poison and gall at him. He paid no attention to her, but turned away and searched among the bird cages. Yes, but there were many hundred nightingales. How was he to find his Jorinda? While he was looking about in this way, he noticed that the old woman was secretly removing a cage with a bird inside, and was making for the door. He sprang swiftly toward her, touched the cage and the witch with the flower, and then she no longer had the power to exercise her spells. Jorinda stood there, as beautiful as before, and threw her arms round Joringel's neck. After that he changed all the other birds back into maidens again, and went home with Jorinda, and they lived long and happily together. The Bremen Town Musicians. Once upon a time, a man had an ass, which for many years carried sacks to the mill without tiring. At last, however, its strength was worn out. It was no longer of any use for work. Accordingly, its master began to ponder how best to cut down its keep. But the ass, seeing there was mischief in the air, ran away and started on the road to Bremen. There he thought he would become a town musician. When he had been traveling a short time, he fell in with a hound, who was lying panting on the road, as though he had run himself off his legs. "Well, why are you panting so, Growler?" said the ass. "Ah," said the hound, "my master wanted to kill me just because I am old and getting weaker every day, and because I can no longer keep up with the pack, so I ran away. But now, how am I to earn my bread?" "Do you know what?" said the ass. "I am going to Bremen, and there I shall become a town musician. Come with me, and take your part in the band. I shall play the lute, and you shall beat the kettle drum." The hound agreed, and they went on. A short time after they came upon a cat, sitting in the road with a face as long as a wet week. "Well, what's wrong with you, Whiskers?" asked the ass. "Who can be cheerful when he is out at elbows?" said the cat. "I'm getting on in years, my teeth are blunt, and I prefer to sit by the stove and purr instead of hunting mice. Just because of this my mistress wanted to drown me. I made myself scarce, but now I don't know where to turn." "Come with us to Bremen," said the ass. "You are a great hand at serenading, so you can become a town musician." The cat consented and joined them. Next the fugitives passed by a yard, where a barnyard fowl was sitting on the door, crowing with all its might. "You crow so loud it pierces through and through," said the ass. "What's the matter?" "Why, didn't I prophesy fine weather for Lady Day, when Our Lady washes the Christ-child's little shirt and wants to dry it? But notwithstanding this, because Sunday visitors are coming tomorrow, the mistress has no pity, and she has ordered the cook to make me into soup. My neck will be wrung tonight, so I'm crowing with all my might while I still have the chance." "Come along, Redcomb," said the ass. "You'd much better come with us. We are going to Bremen, and you will find a much better fate there. You have a good voice, and when we make music together, there will be quality in it." The cock allowed himself to be persuaded, and they all four went off together. They could not, however, reach the town in one day, and by evening they arrived at a wood, where they determined to spend the night. The ass and the hound lay under a big tree. The cat and the cock settled themselves in the branches, the cock flying right up to the top, which was the safest place for him. Before going to sleep he looked round once more in every direction. Suddenly it seemed to him that he saw a light burning in the distance. He called out to his comrades that there must be a house not far off, for he saw a light. "Very well," said the ass. "Let's get up and make our way towards it, for this is a poor lodging." The hound thought some bones or meat would suit him too, so they set out in the direction of the light, and soon saw it shining more clearly, getting bigger and bigger, till they reached a brightly lit robber's den. The ass, being the tallest, approached the window and looked in. "What do you see, old jackass?" asked the cock. "What do I see?" answered the ass. "Why, a table spread with delicious food and drink, and robbers seated round it enjoying themselves." "That would just suit us," said the cock. "Yes, if we were only there," answered the ass. Then the animals took counsel as to how to set about driving the robbers out. At last, they hit upon a plan. The ass was to take up his position with his forefeet on the windowsill. The hound was to jump on his back, the cat to climb up onto the hound, and, last of all, the cock flew up and perched on the cat's head. When they were thus arranged, at a given signal, they all began to perform their music. The ass brayed, the hound barked, the cat meowed, and the cock crowed. Then they dashed through the window, shivering up panes. The noise was so terrible that the robbers jumped up. They thought it was a demon threatening to come in, and fled into the wood in the greatest alarm. Then the four animals sat down at the table and helped themselves to what they liked best, as though they had been starving for weeks. When they had finished eating, they turned out the light and looked for a place to sleep, each one suiting his own nature and taste. The ass lay down on the manure heap, the hound behind the door, the cat on the hearth near the warm ashes, and the cock flew up to the rafters. As they were tired from the long journey, they soon went to sleep. When midnight was past, and the robbers saw from a distance that the light was no longer burning, and that all seemed quiet, the chief said, "We ought not to have been scared by a false alarm," and ordered one of the robbers to go on and investigate the house. Finding all quiet, the messenger went into the kitchen to kindle a light, and taking the cat's glowing, fiery eyes for live coals, he held a match close to them so as to light it. But the cat would stand no nonsense. It flew at his face, spitting and scratching. He was terribly frightened and ran away. He tried to get out by the back door, but the hound, who was laying there, jumped up and bit him in the calf. As he passed the manure heap in front of the house, the ass gave him a good sound kick with his hind leg, while the cock, who had been roused by the uproar, danced frantically on his perch, screeching, "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" The robber ran back as fast as he could to his chief and said, "Oh, there is a gruesome witch in the house, who spat at me and scratched me with her long fingers. Behind the door there's a man with a knife who stabbed me, while in the yard lies a black monster who beat me with a club. Then on the roof sits a devil, and he called out, 'Bring the rogue here.' So I ran away as fast as I could." After this, the robbers did not venture again to the house, which pleased the four Bremen musicians so much that they never wished to leave it again. And the only person who told me the story has hardly finished it yet. Old Sultan. A peasant once had a faithful dog called Sultan, who had grown old and lost all his teeth, so he could no longer keep fast hold of his quarry. One day, when the peasant was standing in front of his house with his wife, he said, "Tomorrow I'm going to shoot old Sultan. He's no longer any use to me." His wife, who pitied the faithful animal, answered, "Since he served us so long and honestly, we might at least keep him and feed him to the end of his days." "What nonsense," said her husband. "You're a fool. He hasn't a tooth left in his head. Thieves aren't a bit afraid of him now that they can get away from him. Even if he has served us well, he has been well fed in return." The poor dog, who lay near stretched out in the sun, heard all they said, and was sad at the thought that the next day was to be his last. Now he had a good friend who was a wolf, and in the evening he slunk off into the wood and complained to him of the fate which awaited him. "Listen, comrade," said the wolf, "be of good cheer. I'll help you in your need, for I have thought of a plan. Tomorrow your master and mistress are going haymaking, and they'll take their baby with them because there won't be anybody left at home. While they work, they usually lie it under the hedge in the shade. You lie down as though to guard it. I'll then come out of the wood and steal the child. You must rush quickly after me, as though you wanted to rescue it. I'll let it fall, and you'll take it back to its parents again. They'll think you saved it, and will be far too thankful to do you any harm. On the contrary, you'll be in high favor and never lack anything again." The plot pleased the dog, and it was carried out just as it had been planned. The father cried out when he saw the wolf run across the field with his child in its mouth. But when the old sultan brought it back, he was overjoyed, stroked him, and said, "Not a hair of your coat shall be hurt. You shall have plenty to eat as long as you live." Then he said to his wife, "Go home immediately and prepare some broth for old Sultan, for which he won't need teeth, and bring the pillow out of my bed. I'll give it to him to lie on." From then on, old Sultan was as well off as he could wish. Soon afterwards, the wolf paid him a visit, and rejoiced that everything had turned out so well. "But, comrade," he said, "you must shut your eyes. Suppose some fine day I carry off one of your master's fat sheep. Nowadays it is hard to earn a living." "Don't count on that," answered the dog. "I must remain true to my master. I shall never permit it." The wolf, thinking that he had not spoken in earnest, came and crept in at night and tried to carry off a sheep. But the peasant, to whom the faithful sultan had betrayed the wolf's intention, spied him and belabored him soundly with a flail. The wolf was forced to retreat, but he called out to the dog, "Wait a bit, you wicked creature. You shall suffer for this." The next morning he sent the boar to invite the dog into the wood, there to settle matters by a duel. Old Sultan could find no second except the cat, who only had 3 legs. When they came out, the poor cat hobbled along, its tail stretched out with pain. The wolf and his second were already in position, but when they saw their opponent coming, they thought that he was bringing a sword, for they took the outstretched tail of the cat for one, and because the poor animal hobbled on 3 legs, they thought nothing less than it was picking up stones to throw at them every time it stooped. Then both of them were frightened. The boar crept away into a thicket, and the wolf jumped into a tree. The dog and the cat were astonished when they arrived to see no one about. The boar, however, had not been able to conceal himself completely. His ears still stuck out. While the cat was looking round cautiously, the boar twitched its ears. The cat, who thought that it was a mouse moving, sprang upon it and began biting with a will. The boar jumped up and ran away, calling out, "The villain is up in that tree." The cat and the dog looked up and saw the wolf, who, ashamed of having shown himself such a coward, made peace with the dog. The straw, the coal, and the bean. Once, there was a poor old woman who lived in a village. She had collected a bundle of beans and was going to cook them. So she prepared a fire on her hearth, and to make it burn up quickly, she lit it with a handful of straw. When she threw the beans into the pot, one escaped her unnoticed and slipped onto the floor, where it lay by a straw. Soon after, a glowing coal jumped out of the fire and joined the others. Then the straw began, and said, "Little friends, how came you hither?" The coal answered, "I have happily escaped the fire, and if I hadn't done so by force of will, my death would certainly have been a most cruel one. I should have been burnt to a cinder." The bean said, "I also have escaped so far with a whole skin, but if the old woman had put me into the pot, I should have been pitilessly boiled down to a broth like my comrades." "Would a better fate have befallen me, then?" asked the straw. "The old woman packed all my brothers into the fire and smoke, 60 of them all done for at once. Fortunately, I slipped through her fingers." "What are we to do now, though?" asked the coal. "My opinion is," said the bean, "that, as we have escaped death, we must all keep together like good comrades, and so that we may run no further risk, we'd better leave the country." This proposal pleased both the others, and they set out together. Before long they came to a little stream, and, as there was neither path nor bridge, they did not know how to get over. The straw at last had an idea and said, "I will throw myself over, and then you can walk across upon me, like a bridge." So the straw stretched himself across from one side to the other, and the coal, which was of a fiery nature, tripped gaily over the newly built bridge. But when it got to the middle and heard the water rushing below, it was frightened and remained speechless, not daring to go any further. The straw began to burn, broke in two, and fell into the stream. The coal, falling with it, fizzled out in the water. The bean, who had cautiously remained on the bank, couldn't help laughing over the whole business, and having begun, was unable to stop, and laughed till she split her sides. Now, it would have all been up with her, had not a wandering tailor, fortunately, been taking a rest by the stream. As he had a sympathetic heart, he brought out a needle and thread and stitched her up again. But, as he used black thread, all beans have a black seam to this day.